The crossbow bolt trembled 2 inches from Rageborn's throat, and still she did not blink. "On your knees," Reuben Warren said, though his voice cracked on the last word, because the woman standing on the narrow rope bridge above the Silvergate ravine did not look like a creature who knelt for anyone. She was tall as a barn door, green-skinned and scarred along one cheekbone, black hair bound in a single thick braid that fell past a breastplate of dark, fitted leather laced tight over a body built for war rather than mercy. Beneath the breastplate her leathers hugged close through the waist and hip, cut for movement, not modesty, and a curved blade hung low on her belt, though her hands, for now, stayed open at her sides. "Your paper says I butchered 30 men alone," she said. Her voice was low, rough as river stone, and utterly without fear. "Even your king's fools should know that is a lie built by someone who has never swung a blade in his life." Reuben had thought the same thing 3 days ago, reading the bounty notice nailed to the post outside Thornwell's garrison, and it was the reason his bolt had not yet flown. But behind him, boots rang against the swaying planks of the bridge, and he did not need to turn to know who had followed his trail up the mountain. Warren. Garrick Voss's voice carried the particular cheer of a man who smelled easy coin. 3 other hunters flanked him, blades already drawn. "Didn't figure you'd beat us to her. No matter. 500 crowns splits fine amongst friends, and dead orc flesh weighs the same as living." "The bounty says bring her in for judgment," Reuben said, not turning his head, keeping the crossbow leveled at Yash even as his voice hardened toward the men behind him. "Not bring in pieces." "Judgment's slow and pays the same as a corpse," Garrick said, and stepped past him toward the bridge, sword rising. What happened next happened faster than Reuben could later explain to anyone, including himself. Rageborn moved like the mountain itself had decided to strike back. She caught Garrick's first swing on a forearm guard of studded leather, wrenched the blade from his grip with a twist that made the man scream, and put her boot into his chest so that he folded backward into the ravine wind, catching himself only by luck and a fistful of rope. The other 3 hunters surged forward, and Reuben, without deciding to, without weighing it the way a careful man should, swung his crossbow away from the orc woman and put a bolt through the leading hunter's thigh instead. "What in the hell's Warren?" one of the others shouted. "She hangs for a trial, not for your purse," Reuben shouted back, drawing his short sword now, planting himself between the hunters and the woman he had, moments before, meant to drag to the gallows himself. Rageborn looked at him with something between fury and astonishment, green eyes narrowed beneath dark brows, and for one suspended second the wind howling through the ravine seemed the only sound in the world. "You would fight your own kind for me," she said. It was not quite a question. "I would fight anyone who thinks murder is the same as justice," Reuben said, and meant it, though his heart hammered hard enough to bruise his ribs. The bridge swayed. Below them, the ravine dropped 100 feet to white water and broken stone, and above them the peaks of the Silvergate range wore their crowns of old snow, indifferent to the small, furious drama playing out on the rope strung between 2 cliffs. Garrick Voss, cursing, hauled himself back onto the planks, murder plain on his face, but he saw the sword in Reuben's hand and the wild readiness in the orc woman's stance, and made the only sensible choice a coward could make. He gathered his wounded friend and retreated, shouting promises of a reckoning that neither Reuben nor Yash paid any mind to at all. When they were gone, Yash turned the whole weight of her attention on him, and Reuben found himself wishing, absurdly, that he had kept the crossbow raised, because it had been easier to be brave when there was steel between them. "Why?" she said simply. "Because 30 trained caravan guards do not die to one blade," Reuben said. "Because I read that notice 3 times and it smelled like something written by a man protecting himself, not describing a crime. Because I have hunted enough bounties to know the smell of a lie, and that one reeked." She studied him a long moment, and something in her hard expression eased, though not all the way. "And now what, human? You still mean to bring me down this mountain in chains?" "I mean to bring you to Silvergate Monastery," Reuben said, where the gray order keeps neutral ground and hears both sides before any rope is tied. If you are innocent, I will stand with you and say so before whoever needs to hear it. If you are not, he let that hang, though he did not truly believe it any longer. If I am not, you will put that sword through me yourself, Yash finished for him, and there was, astonishingly, the ghost of a fierce, approving smile at the corner of her mouth. You are either the bravest fool on this mountain, Reuben Warren, or the greatest one. Might be both, he admitted, and did not lower his sword until she nodded once, and began walking toward the monastery road herself, as though she had decided to go there all along and merely allowed him the courtesy of thinking it his idea. The road to Silvergate Monastery climbed through pine and gray stone for the better part of 2 days, and in that time Reuben learned more of Yash Rageborn than he had learned of any living soul in years of solitary bounty work. She did not walk bound. He had considered rope once in the first hour, and she had looked at him with such flat contempt that he had quietly put the coil back in his pack and never mentioned it again. "Tell me of the caravan," he said on the first night, as they shared a fire in a hollow between 2 boulders, the cold air sharp enough to bite. "There is little to tell that I understand myself," Yash said, turning a strip of dried meat over the flame on a green branch. "My father is chieftain of the Rageborn clan. For 2 years his men and the warden of Thornwell's men have not raided each other's grazing lands because of a treaty, and because I was to be given in marriage to Lord Aldrich Thorn to seal it deeper. My kind do not marry for love, Reuben Warren. We marry for alliance, for land, for peace bought in blood price and vows. It is the way it has always been." "And you refused him," Reuben said, because he could hear it in the iron of her voice. "I refused him," she agreed. "I told my father I would rather die on a Thornwell blade defending the border than live my whole life warming some soft lord's bed for a treaty I never chose. He was furious. The clan elders were furious. And 3 weeks later, the caravan carrying Thornwell grain and Thornwell soldiers through the low pass was found slaughtered to the last man, and somehow, impossibly, every witness who lived long enough to speak swore the killer wore orc scars and stood alone. You think someone wanted the marriage to fail badly enough to murder 30 men and hang it on you?" "I think," Yash said, staring into the fire, "that someone wanted the treaty to fail, and a dead alliance is worth less than a war if you are the sort of man who profits from war." Reuben chewed on that as much as on his own dried meat. He had turned in 11 bounties in his 6 years walking these mountains for coin, and he had believed every notice he served, until the 9th one, a farmer named Oscar Bell, who Reuben had marched to the Thornwell gallows on a forgery charge that turned out, 3 weeks after the rope, to have been planted by the man's own brother over an inheritance dispute. Reuben had not slept easily since. He had sworn in the quiet, ashamed way a man swears things to himself and no one else that he would never again deliver a soul to judgment without looking hard at the evidence first. "I believe you," he said finally. Yash looked up, and in the firelight her green eyes held something raw and unguarded for just a moment before the wall came back down. "You have known me 2 days." "I have known liars for 6 years," Reuben said. "You are not one." She did not answer that, but she did not argue it either, and when she settled to sleep that night she chose the side of the fire nearest him, close enough that Reuben lay awake a long while listening to her breathing even out, absurdly comforted by the presence of a woman who could have broken his neck between 2 fingers. The Silvergate Monastery rose out of the pass like something grown from the mountain itself, gray stone walls and a bell tower capped in green copper, and around its outer courtyard sprawled the Hallow Market, the seasonal trading ground where human merchants from the lowland kingdoms and orc traders from the clan territories met under the monastery's neutral banner to exchange wool, iron, salt, and grain, without the old wars following them through the gate. When Reuben and Yash came down the last switchback of the road into that market, the crowd noticed her before they noticed him, and the noticing was not kind. "Orc!" someone shouted, and the word rippled through the stalls like a stone thrown into still water. A cart of turnips overturned as a woman scrambled back from the road. A man with a butcher's cleaver still in his hand pushed forward through the gathering crowd, and within a dozen heartbeats there were 20 people between Yash and the monastery gate, and none of them looked friendly. "She is the butcher of Thornwell Caravan," someone else called, and Reuben's stomach dropped, because the notice had clearly reached this market before they had. "Stand behind me," Reuben said to Yash, low and urgent, though he already knew what she would say to that. "I do not stand behind anyone," Yash said, but she did not move to draw her blade either, and Reuben understood with a strange ache that she was giving him room to be the fool he had already decided to be. He stepped in front of her anyway, both hands raised, empty, toward the advancing crowd. "She has not been tried," he said, loud enough to carry over the market noise. "She has not been proven guilty of anything. I am a bounty man, and I am bringing her before the Gray Order for judgment, same as the law of this pass requires. Any man who lays a hand on her before that judgment is spoken answers to the abbot for breaking sanctuary law, and answers to me besides." The butcher with the cleaver did not look impressed by one man's sword against a mob's fury, and for a moment Reuben thought his conscience had walked him straight into a beating he could not win. Then the deep iron voice of the monastery bell tolled once, unscheduled, a summons, and every head in the market turned toward the gate, where an old monk in gray robes stood with a hand raised, flanked by 2 younger brothers holding the long ceremonial staves that marked the Gray Order's authority over this ground. "This is hallowed neutral ground," the old monk called, and his voice, though thin with age, cut through the crowd like a blade through cloth. "No blood is spilled here without judgment first spoken. Bring the accused before me, bounty man, and let us hear what has actually happened, rather than what fear has decided happened." Reuben had never been more grateful to hear a stranger's voice in his life. He glanced back at Yash, who had not so much as flinched through the whole ordeal, though her hand had drifted, unconsciously, close to the hilt of her blade, and together they walked through the parting, muttering crowd toward the monastery gate, toward the old monk who called himself Brother Emeric, and toward whatever judgment the mountain had in store for them. Brother Emeric's study smelled of tallow candles and old parchment, and he listened to both of their accounts without interruption, his weathered hands folded before him on a desk scarred by decades of ink and use. When they had finished, he sat quiet for a long moment, studying Yash with eyes that had clearly seen more of the world's cruelty than most. "The trade moot gathers here in 3 days' time," he said finally. "Representatives of House Thorn will attend, as will emissaries of the Rageborn clan, as is custom every season. I will hold judgment of this matter until then before both peoples together, so that whatever is decided cannot be called the work of one side alone. Until that day you have sanctuary within these walls, Yash Rageborn, and you, Reuben Warren, bear the responsibility of a man who has vouched for her before this order. That is not a light thing to carry." "I understand," Reuben said. "Do you," Brother Emeric said, not unkindly, "or do you simply hope you do?" He rose, robes whispering against the stone floor. 3 days, use them to find truth, not comfort. This mountain has swallowed enough lies already. The infirmary of Silvergate Monastery held 4 beds, and only one was occupied, by a caravan guard named Pell who had been carried in more dead than alive 3 weeks past, the sole survivor anyone had found of the Thornwell massacre. He had been too fevered to question when the notice was first written, the monks explained, and had only in the last days begun to speak in anything but broken fragments. Reuben found him on the second morning of their 3 days, propped against a pillow, a long scar tracking from his collarbone to his ribs where a blade had opened him nearly to the bone. Yash stood in the doorway rather than approaching, and Reuben understood without being told that she did not want her presence to frighten a wounded man into silence. "You were with the caravan," Reuben said gently, settling onto the stool beside the bed. Pell's eyes, sunken and haunted, fixed on him. 30 of us. Good men, most of them. We were 3 days from the pass when they came out of the tree line. His hands trembled where they lay on the blanket. It was not one. It was a dozen at least, maybe more, and they did not fight like clan warriors. They fought like soldiers, disciplined, wearing orc scars painted on like theater masks, not carved into the skin the way a true clan warrior wears them. Reuben's pulse quickened. Painted. I saw it clear before I went down, Pell said. One man's paint had smeared in the rain, and beneath it his skin was pale as any farmer's. Human men playing orc to make it look like a clan raid. He swallowed hard. I told this to the steward when he came to question me, Master Hale. He told me I was fevered and mistaken, and that I should say nothing more to anyone until I was well, for my own good. Reuben sat very still. Corvin Hale, Lord Aldrich's steward. The same, Pell said. Reuben rose from the stool and turned to find Yash already watching him from the doorway, her jaw set, her eyes bright with something fierce and vindicated and furious all at once. He silenced the one witness who could clear me, she said, and let the notice stand so the world would believe it was my people who broke the treaty, not his. We need proof beyond one wounded man's word, Reuben said. Something that will hold before both delegations at the moot. Then we find it, Yash said, and the way she said it, like a woman already halfway down the mountain toward whatever answer waited, made Reuben's chest ache with something he did not yet have a name for. They found their way, that afternoon, to the trading stalls where a caravan of Thornwell wool merchants had set up under gray canvas awnings, and among the crates and bolts of cloth, Reuben's practiced eye caught the glint of a dagger being sold cheap by a nervous young trader, a blade whose hilt bore a small wax seal impression that Reuben recognized from his years serving Thornwell notices. The sigil of Corvin Hale's own household guard, not House Thorn's crest at all, but the private mark of the steward's personal retainers. "Where did you get this?" Yash asked the trader, her voice low, and something in her presence made the young man answer honestly rather than haggle. "Bought it off a soldier 3 weeks back, cheap. Said he needed coin quick and quiet," the trader stammered. "Said his company had been let go sudden-like after some business up in the low pass. Wouldn't say more." Reuben turned the dagger over in his hands, the steward's private seal catching the mountain light, and felt the shape of the whole conspiracy click into place like the last piece of a puzzle he had not known he was solving. Corvin Hale hired his own men to slaughter the caravan and dress it as an orc raid, Reuben said slowly, to break the treaty, to make it look like Yash's people struck first, so House Thorn would have cause for war instead of peace. "But why?" Yash said. "What does a steward gain from war he did not gain from peace?" "Land," Reuben said, the old bounty hunter's instinct for motive finally settling on solid ground. "A peace treaty means the disputed grazing land along the low pass stays contested, shared, argued over in council chambers forever. A war means House Thorn seizes it outright, and whoever administers seized land in the warden's name after a victory stands to profit more in one season than a lifetime of steward's wages." Yash's hand closed around the dagger's hilt hard enough that Reuben half expected the leather grip to crack. He would drown 2 peoples in blood for a strip of pasture. "Men like that always find a reason that sounds bigger than what it truly is," Reuben said quietly. "But we have his seal, we have Pell's testimony, and if we can find even one of those soldiers he dismissed, we have enough to bring before the moot." That night, in the small stone guest cell the monks had given her within the monastery walls, Yash Rageborn sat on the edge of a narrow cot with the recovered dagger across her knees, and Reuben, checking the wards on her door as he had every night since they arrived, found her staring at the blade as though it might yet tell her more than it already had. "You did not have to believe me on a mountain trail with a bolt at my throat," she said without looking up. "Most men would have collected the coin and slept easy." "I am not most men," Reuben said, leaning against the doorframe. "No," Yash agreed, and now she did look up, and the candlelight caught the scar on her cheekbone and the fierce, open one in her eyes that she had until that moment kept carefully hidden. "You are not." She rose from the cot in one unhurried motion and crossed the small cell to stand before him, closer than propriety allowed, closer than a bounty hunter and his charge had any business standing, and Reuben's breath caught somewhere behind his ribs. "My kind do not do this," she said low, almost a warning to herself as much as to him. "We do not choose softly. We do not choose for nothing but wanting." "Then what are you doing now?" Reuben asked, though his voice had gone rough and quiet. "Wanting," Yash said simply, and closed the last distance between them and kissed him. It was not a gentle thing. It was hungry and certain, her hand fisting in the collar of his coat to pull him closer. And Reuben, stunned for one heartbeat before his body caught up with his sense, kissed her back with 6 years of loneliness, finally finding somewhere to go. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Yash pressed her forehead briefly to his, an unexpected tenderness after the fierceness of the kiss. "This changes nothing about the moot," she said. "We still need our proof." "No," Reuben agreed, smiling despite himself. "But I find I mind the danger a great deal less than I did an hour ago." She laughed then, a real laugh, low and surprised at herself, and the sound of it settled into Reuben's chest like something he intended to keep for the rest of his life. The proof they still needed arrived sooner than either of them expected, and considerably more violently. They had gone, on the third day before the moot, to question a caravan of soldiers camped a half-mile below the monastery who Pell had named as belonging to Corvin Hale's personal retinue. And it was there, in the failing evening light, that they found the camp already burning, the soldiers gone, and a single note pinned to a tent pole with a throwing knife. "No witnesses." "He knows we are close," Yash said, scanning the tree line with the flat, dangerous calm of a warrior expecting attack. "He knows we are close enough to matter," Reuben agreed, "which means he will come for us before the moot, not risk facing us at it." They were right, and they were too slow to be ready for it. That night, as the monastery settled into the hush of prayer and sleep, Corvin Hale's men came over the outer wall in the dark, a dozen of them, blades muffled with cloth, moving with the same disciplined silence Pell had described from the caravan slaughter 3 weeks before. Reuben woke to the sound of a monk's cry cut short in the courtyard below, and by the time he had his sword in hand and reached Yash's cell, she was already awake, already armed, already moving toward the sound of danger rather than away from it. "They are here for me," she said, "and for Pell, so he cannot speak at the moot." "Then we protect Pell first," Reuben said, and together they ran through torchlit corridors toward the infirmary, arriving just as 2 of Hale's soldiers broke down the door where the wounded guard lay helpless. Yash took the first man off his feet with a blow that sent him crashing into the stone wall, and Reuben's sword found the second before he could turn, and for one breathless moment the infirmary was theirs again, Pell wide-eyed and alive behind them. "Get him to the abbot's tower," Reuben said. "It is stone through and through, easier to hold." But the courtyard beyond the infirmary had filled with more soldiers than they could fight through, torches and drawn steel blocking every path to safety. And when Reuben and Yash burst out with Pell braced between them, they found themselves cut off from the tower entirely, driven instead up the narrow stair to the outer wall walk, the only direction left open, with archers already gathering below in the market square to cut off any retreat down the stairs. "We are trapped," Reuben said, chest heaving, as they reached the top of the wall and looked down at a sheer 40-foot drop on the outer side, the mountain road curling along the cliff face below, and on that road, Providence or luck or something like it, a heavy grain wagon rumbling along toward the market, piled high with loose wool bales for the coming trade moot. An arrow splintered against the stone beside Reuben's head. Below them, at the base of the stairs, Hale's soldiers began their climb. "Yash," Reuben said, staring at the wagon at the impossible height, at the woman beside him who had already read his mind and was already grinning, fierce and reckless and alive. "You are either the bravest fool on this mountain," she said, echoing his own words back at him, "or the greatest one. Might be both, Reuben said and took her hand. They ran the last few steps together and leapt from the monastery wall into open air, Pell's weight between them making the fall wild and uneven. And for one endless heartbeat there was nothing beneath them but wind and torchlight, and the memory of a life Reuben had lived alone until 3 days ago. Then the wool bales caught them in a soft, bone-jarring impact that drove the breath from all 3 of their lungs at once, and the startled wagon driver screamed and hauled uselessly at his reins as his terrified oxen bolted down the steep mountain road with 3 strangers buried in his cargo, and a dozen armed men shouting from the wall above. "Cut the traces!" Yash bellowed over the driver's panic, hauling herself up through the wool to see the road ahead curling along the cliff edge in the dark. "The oxen will run us into the ravine." Reuben scrambled forward across the shifting bales, found the driver frozen with terror at the reins, and pulled the man bodily back into the wool. "I have driven wagons before," he shouted, though in truth he had driven nothing wilder than a farmer's cart, and seized the reins himself, hauling hard against the panicked animals as the wagon careened around a bend with the cliff dropping away not 3 feet from the wheels. Behind them, torches bobbed at the top of the wall, and a horn sounded the alarm, but Hale's men on foot could not match a runaway wagon's pace down the mountain, and within minutes the shouting fell away into the dark behind them, leaving only the thunder of hooves, the groan of the wagon frame, and Yash Rageborn's arm braced hard around Reuben's shoulders as she leaned out over the wool to help him fight the reins around the last treacherous curve before the road leveled into the valley below. They did not stop until the oxen finally exhausted themselves a mile past the monastery, standing lathered and trembling in a moonlit clearing beside a stream, and when the wagon finally rattled to a halt, all 3 passengers sat in stunned silence for a long moment among the scattered wool bales, hearts hammering, before the driver, a young man named Tobin who had clearly not signed on for any of this, began to laugh in the high, brittle way of a man who has just realized he survived something that should have killed him. "I will tell my grandchildren about this," Tobin said weakly, "and none of them will believe me." Pell, bruised but breathing, managed a pained smile from where he lay wrapped in wool. "Tell them an orc and a bounty man jumped off a wall to save a half-dead guardsman, nobody important. Nobody will believe that part either." Yash Rageborn looked at Reuben across the wreckage of wool and moonlight, her braid come loose, a smear of dirt across one cheek, and something in her face had softened into an expression Reuben had not yet seen on her, unguarded and warm and entirely his. "You jumped off a wall for me," she said. "You jumped first," Reuben pointed out. "I am an orc warrior," Yash said. "Falling from walls is expected of me. You are a bounty man who could have simply let the soldiers take me and collected no coin for the trouble either way, and you jumped anyway." "I told you," Reuben said, reaching over to brush the dirt from her cheek, his hand lingering there longer than the task required. "I am not most men." "No," Yash said again, softer this time, and turned her face into his palm. "You are not." They made camp that night in a hollow above the stream, Tobin and Pell settling near the fire while Reuben and Yash kept the first watch a little apart, sitting shoulder to shoulder on a fallen log with the mountain stars spread thick and cold above them. It was there, in the quiet after danger, with adrenaline finally bleeding out into exhaustion, and something gentler, that Yash spoke of her mother, dead these 10 years in a border skirmish before the treaty had ever been drawn, and of a childhood spent proving herself twice as fierce as any warrior's son in the clan, so that no one would dare pity the chieftain's motherless daughter. Reuben spoke in turn of the farm he had grown up on and lost to debt after his father's death, of the long, lonely years of bounty work that had followed, of Oscar Bell's hanging and the guilt that had never quite washed off his hands. "You carry that man's death like a stone in your boot," Yash said. "I have watched you limp under it since the day you caught me on that bridge." "I do not know how to put it down," Reuben admitted. "You put it down tonight," Yash said, "when you chose to believe me instead of the coin, when you jumped from that wall instead of letting fear decide for you. A man who could still do that is not the same man who hanged an innocent farmer. Let the stone go, Reuben Warren. You have carried it far enough." He did not have words for what that gave him, so he simply reached for her hand in the dark, and she let him take it, her calloused fingers closing around his with a gentleness that felt, somehow, more intimate than the kiss had been. And they sat like that until the fire burned low and Tobin's snoring rose steady from the hollow behind them. Later that night, when the others slept and the watch had passed to Tobin's uneasy turn, Yash drew Reuben a little apart into the shelter of the trees. And what passed between them there was neither hurried nor careless but slow and certain. A warmth built patiently over 3 days of danger and honesty, finally finding its full expression beneath the mountain stars. She was, Reuben would think often in the years after, the most fearless thing he had ever touched, and the most tender. And when she finally drew him close and murmured against his ear that she had not known a heart could feel this crowded and this full at once, he understood that, whatever judgment waited for them at the monastery, he had already found the truest verdict of his life. They returned to Silvergate Monastery on the morning of the trade moot, walking openly through the market square with Pell supported between them and Tobin trailing nervously behind, and the crowd that had nearly turned violent 5 days before now parted in uneasy silence. Word of the night raid, and the wall leap, and the runaway wagon having already raced ahead of them through every stall and tent in the Hallow Market. The moot was held in the monastery's great courtyard, where Brother Emeric presided from a raised stone dais, flanked on one side by a delegation from House Thorne, Lord Aldrich Thorne himself seated stiff and pale beside his steward Corvin Hale, and on the other side by 3 grim-faced emissaries of the Rageborn clan, among whom stood a broad, gray-braided orc man whose resemblance to Yash was unmistakable even before Brother Emeric named him. "Chief Barak Rageborn," the old monk announced, "come to witness judgment concerning his daughter." Yash's father's eyes found her across the crowded courtyard, and something complicated passed over his weathered face, relief and anger and pride tangled together, though he said nothing yet, waiting, as custom demanded, for the judgment to be properly heard. "Let the accused speak first," Brother Emeric said, "and then let any who dispute her word bring their proof." Yash stepped forward, and Reuben watched her stand before both peoples with her spine straight and her chin high, utterly unbowed, and gave her account of the massacre's true architecture. The painted soldiers, the steward's private seal on a discarded dagger, the witness silenced in his sickbed, the burned camp meant to erase the last loose thread before the moot could unravel it. Corvin Hale rose before she had even finished, his face a mask of practiced outrage. Lies, all of it, spun to save her own neck. "Where is this dagger, this so-called proof, if it exists at all?" Reuben stepped forward and set the dagger on the stone table before Brother Emeric. Hilt turned to show the wax seal impression pressed into its pommel. "Your household guard's private mark, Master Hale, sold by a soldier who was paid to disappear quietly after the caravan burned. And here," he gestured, and Pell, leaning heavily on Tobin's shoulder, stepped forward himself, "is a man who survived what your soldiers did, and who you told to hold his tongue while he lay too fevered to know better." Pell's voice, thin but steady, carried across the courtyard as he described the painted faces, the smeared disguise beneath the rain, the discipline of trained soldiers rather than raiding clan warriors, and the moment Corvin Hale had leaned over his sickbed and told him with quiet menace that fevered men who spoke foolishness sometimes did not recover at all. Lord Aldrich Thorne, pale before, had gone the color of ash. "Corvin," he said, low and shaking, "tell me this is not true." "My lord, she refused you," Hale said, and something desperate cracked through his composure at last. "She would have made you a laughingstock before every house in the kingdom, and the treaty with it." "I only meant to. You meant to drown 2 peoples in war so you could carve yourself a fortune from seized land," Reuben finished for him, his voice hard as the stone beneath their feet. "Say it plainly, since you have already said everything else." The courtyard had gone utterly silent, traders and monks and clan warriors alike frozen in the weight of the moment, and Brother Emeric rose slowly from his seat. "Corvin Hale," the old monk said, "you stand accused before both peoples of murder, of forgery, and of treason against the peace of this pass. What say you?" Hale said nothing at all, which was, in its own way, everything, and at the abbot's gesture 2 of the Grey Order's staff-bearers moved to take him into custody, his protests trailing weakly behind him as he was led from the courtyard toward whatever Justice House Thorne's own laws would eventually mete out. "Yash Rageborn," Brother Emeric said, turning back to the courtyard. "This order finds you innocent of the crimes laid against you, and declares the bounty on your name void and false from this day forward." A ragged cheer went up from some corner of the crowd, quickly hushed, but Reuben felt the truth of it settle into his chest like a held breath finally released. Yash turned to him, her eyes bright, and for a moment neither of them cared who was watching as she caught his hand in both of hers. But the moot was not yet finished, and Chief Borak Rageborn stepped forward from among the clan emissaries, his voice carrying the weight of a father and a chieftain both. "My daughter is cleared," he said, "and I am glad of it beyond words I know how to speak. But the treaty with House Thorne now lies in ruins, its architect exposed as a traitor, its intended alliance broken before it was ever sealed. The clan elders have spoken already of a new match, a new alliance with the Ashcliffe clan to the north, to steady what Thornwell's failure has shaken loose." "Yash, you will know," Yash said, and the word rang through the courtyard like a struck bell. Her father stopped, startled into silence by the flat certainty in her voice. "I have spent my whole life being told my worth to this clan is measured in what I can be traded for," Yash said, stepping fully into the center of the courtyard now, where every eye, human and orc alike, could see her. "A bride for Thornwell's peace, a bride for Ashcliffe's steel. My kind have never married for anything but alliance, father. Never for love, never for choice, never for nothing but the person standing in front of them. I refused Aldrich Thorne because I would not be a peace bought and paid for. And I tell you now, before this whole moot, that I will not be Ashcliffe's peace either." Yash Chief Borak began, low warning in his voice. "I have already chosen," Yash said, and turned, and held out her hand toward Reuben Warren, who stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard, feeling every eye in the pass suddenly upon him. "This man believed me when the whole world had already decided I was guilty. He put his sword between me and a mob at this very gate. He leapt from that wall behind me rather than let me face Hale's blades alone. He has no lands, no titles, no alliance worth a treaty's ink, and I do not want him for any of those reasons. I want him because he is Reuben Warren, and because he is the first thing in my life I have ever chosen for nothing but myself." The courtyard erupted into a confusion of voices, some outraged, some astonished, a few, mostly among the younger traders and the wounded Pell, openly delighted, and Chief Borak stood very still amid the noise, staring at his daughter with an expression Reuben could not read. "This is not our way," the chieftain said finally, quieter now, though still audible in the hush that followed. "A Rageborn does not marry a landless bounty man for nothing but wanting him." "Then I will be the first," Yash said, unflinching. "Better the first than another daughter traded away and told to call it honor." Brother Emeric, watching this unfold from his dais with the patient interest of a man who had mediated a great many disputes in his long life, finally spoke. "Chief Borak, this order has no authority over Rageborn custom, but I would remind you that this same custom nearly cost your clan a war when your daughter refused it once already, and that this same man standing beside her uncovered the truth that saved both our peoples from bleeding over a lie. Perhaps custom might bend this once to make room for what has already proven itself." Chief Borak looked long at Reuben Warren, a slow, measuring look that took in the plain leather coat, the calloused hands, the steady, unflinching way the human man met a chieftain's gaze without flinching despite holding no rank at all. "You leapt from a monastery wall for my daughter," Borak said finally. I would leap from 100 walls for her, Reuben said, and found to his own surprise that his voice did not shake at all. Words are cheap on a mountain like this one, Borek said. Among my people, a man who would claim a warrior's daughter proves it, not says it. There is a custom older than any marriage alliance, older than any treaty, the challenge of worth. If you would stand as her equal before this clan, you stand a trial not of blood but of resolve, and let the mountain itself judge whether your devotion is more than pretty words spoken in a crowded courtyard. Yash's jaw tightened. Father, this is not necessary. It is necessary for me, Borek said, not unkindly, as her father, and it is necessary for the clan, who will otherwise never accept this bond as anything but scandal. Let him prove it, daughter, or let this end here. Reuben looked at Yash, and found in her eyes not doubt of him but fear for him, a fear far more telling than any words she might have spoken, and something in that fear settled his own resolve completely. Name your trial, Reuben said to the chieftain. Borek's gray brows rose slightly, as though he had expected hesitation and found none. There is a shrine above the monastery, at the lip of the highest ridge, where clan warriors have carried offerings of worth to the old stones since before the treaty, before Thornwell, before any of this pass belonged to anyone but wind and snow. The climb is treacherous even for trained warriors. You will carry a stone from this courtyard to that shrine before the sun sets, and you will carry it alone, with no aid from my daughter or any other. And if you stand at that shrine when the light fails, I will know your resolve is no lie. It was, Reuben understood immediately, less a physical trial than a symbolic one, though the mountain would make it plenty physical regardless, a cruel, ice-slick climb along exposed rock that had likely killed careless men before. But he thought of the wall he had already leapt from, of the bolt he had lowered on a bridge 5 days ago, of every choice that had led him here, and found the trial, however hard, no different in kind from all the rest. Give me the stone, he said. The climb took the whole of that afternoon, and Reuben would remember little of it afterward beyond aching muscles, bleeding palms, and the terrible, singular focus of a man determined not to fail the only thing he had ever truly wanted. The stone Chief Borek had given him was no larger than a loaf of bread, but grew heavier with every 100 feet of elevation, and twice the narrow ridge trail crumbled beneath his boots and left him clinging to bare rock with his heart hammering and the wind screaming past his ears. He did not look down. He thought instead of Yash's hand closing around his on the bridge 5 days before, of her laugh in the wreckage of wool and moonlight, of the fierce, unguarded warmth in her eyes when she had told the whole moot she had chosen him for nothing but himself, and he kept climbing. He reached the shrine, a ring of ancient standing stones weathered smooth by centuries of mountain wind, just as the sun touched the western peaks and turned the whole sky the deep gold of a struck bell. He set the stone among the others already gathered there, generations of offerings left by warriors he would never know, and sat down hard on the cold rock, his hands shaking, his breath tearing at his lungs, and allowed himself, finally, to weep a little from sheer exhausted relief. When he made his way back down at dusk, torches already lit along the trail below where Yash and half the clan delegation had gathered to watch for him. It was Yash who broke from the group first, running up the last stretch of trail heedless of the treacherous footing, and caught him hard enough to nearly knock them both from the path when she reached him. "You absolute fool," she said into his shoulder, her voice thick. "You could have died on that ridge." "I did not," Reuben pointed out, though his voice was hoarse and his whole body ached like one long bruise. "No," Yash agreed, pulling back just enough to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears she would likely have denied to anyone else in the world. "You did not. You climbed a mountain for me, Reuben Warren." "I would climb 100, Reuben said, and this time when he said it, standing on that trail with the torches guttering around them and the whole clan watching in silence, it did not feel like a promise made in the heat of a courtroom, but a simple, settled fact of his life from now until its end. Chief Borek came forward through the gathered crowd, and for a long moment he studied Reuben Warren, mud-streaked and bleeding and swaying slightly on his feet, with an expression that had finally, fully, lost its edge of suspicion. No man climbs that ridge for coin, or for fear, or for anything but the truest kind of wanting, Borek said. I have seen warriors turn back from that trail who feared nothing else in this world. He extended a broad, scarred hand toward Reuben, and Reuben, understanding the gesture even through his exhaustion, clasped it firmly. Welcome, Reuben Warren, to whatever madness my daughter intends to make of the rest of your life. The laughter that broke through the gathered crowd at that was warm rather than mocking, and Yash, gripping Reuben's other hand as though she meant never to release it again, laughed loudest of all. They were married 3 days later, at dawn, in the same courtyard where the moot had cleared Yash's name and unmade her father's plans for another political match. And the ceremony blended traditions that had never once, in the long history of the Silvergate Pass, been asked to share the same ground. Brother Emeric spoke the neutral rites of the Grey Order first, binding hands with a plain gray cord that the monastery kept for exactly such rare unions between the two peoples, while Chief Borak, standing at his daughter's side with unmistakable pride now settled into every line of his weathered face, performed the older Rageborn claiming rite that followed, drawing a thin ceremonial line of ash and ochre along the back of Yash's wrist, and then, at her own insistence, along Reuben's as well. A mark that would fade within days but which every orc present understood as an unbreakable claiming, freely given, freely accepted. Among my people, Yash said, loud enough for the whole courtyard, human and orc traders and monks and even a recovering Pell and a still nervous Tabin all crowded together to hear. A claiming mark is not placed on a bride bought for treaty or alliance. It is placed only when a warrior chooses with her whole heart and means to defend that choice with her whole life. My kind have never married for anything but alliance. She turned to Reuben, and her voice, for the first time since he had met her on that swaying rope bridge, trembled slightly with something other than fury or resolve. I am marrying you, Reuben Warren, for absolutely nothing but yourself. And I am marrying you, Reuben said, his own voice rough, for the same exact reason, and for every mountain I would still climb to keep you. Brother Emeric pronounced them bound before both peoples, and the courtyard, so nearly a battlefield of mob fury 5 days before, erupted instead into cheering that human traders and orc emissaries alike joined without a shred of the old hesitation, as though the pass itself had exhaled a breath it had been holding for decades. Lord Aldrich Thorne, present at the ceremony with a new, humbled steward at his side, and a genuine apology for Yash that he delivered publicly and without excuse, raised his cup with the rest when the moment came, and even Chief Borak, watching his daughter kiss a landless human bounty hunter in front of the entire Hallow Market, found himself smiling in a way his clan had rarely seen from their stern chieftain. Later, as the market feast stretched long into the mountain evening, fires lit against the coming cold and the sound of both human fiddles and orc drums mingling strangely, wonderfully, into something new neither people had quite made before. Yash drew Reuben a little apart from the celebration to stand at the edge of the courtyard, where the monastery wall looked out over the pass they had fled down together not a week earlier. 5 days ago you had a bolt aimed at my throat, she said, leaning into him as his arm settled around her waist. 5 days ago I did not know what I was aiming at, Reuben said. A bounty, a stranger. I did not know I was aiming at the rest of my life. And now, Yash said, turning in his arms to face him fully, the firelight from the feast behind them catching the fierce, open warmth in her eyes. What do you see? Everything I did not know I was allowed to want, Reuben said simply. A woman who chose me for nothing but myself, in a world that told her she was only ever meant to be traded away for something else. I do not have lands to offer you, Yash Rageborn. I do not have a title or a treaty, or anything a chieftain's daughter is supposed to want. You climbed a mountain with your bare hands rather than lose me, Yash said, and you stood between me and a mob with nothing but a sword and your own stubborn conscience, and you leapt off a wall in the dark because you decided, in the space of one heartbeat, that my life was worth more to you than your own safety. I have been offered lands, Reuben Warren. I have been offered titles and treaties, and alliances dressed up as devotion. None of them were worth a single one of those 5 days with you. Below them, the pass stretched dark and vast toward the lowlands, the mountain wind carrying the sound of fiddle and drum out over the ravine, where a rope bridge still swayed, unremarkable now. A place that would have meant nothing to either of them a week ago, and would mean everything for the rest of their lives from now on. Yash Rageborn, warrior of the Rageborn clan, feared by soldiers and courted by chieftains and offered, more than once, as the price of a peace she had never chosen, rested her forehead against Reuben Warren's, a landless bounty hunter with nothing to his name but a stubborn conscience and a willingness to leap from any height the world demanded of him, and found in his arms the only alliance she had ever wanted to keep. "Stay," she murmured, though it was no longer a request and had not been for days. "Always," Reuben said, and behind them the fires of the Hallow Market burned bright and warm against the mountain dark, and for the first time in either of their lives, neither one of them was alone.